Hello, my name's Ria Bales and I'm the Managing Director of Bales Partners Consulting. And today I am joined by Caroline Evans, who is the Corporate Strategy Director at Arden University. Caroline has also spent a lot of time working with many organisations as a consultant on large-scale programmes and strategy implementation as well. So really excited to hear Caroline's observations and tips around strategy today.
Brilliant, thanks Ria. I'm really glad to be here and give my point of view.
Fabulous. So, Caroline, I think that strategy is really, really important, I think, for people to be able to get excited about strategy. It's not something that is just starts and ends in the boardroom. I think that, the excitement and the inspiration around strategy is really, really important. But I find that, I guess, when I look in organisations, the word strategy gets bandied about absolutely everywhere. Everything is strategic or everything needs a strategy. And in actual fact, I think that can be quite confusing for people that kind of all across organisations. Maybe talk to me about, what does strategy mean for you?
Yeah, it's a really, really good point, Ria. I think sometimes strategy does get overused. You're absolutely right. But I think there is also a tendency to sort of lionize it a little bit, sort of put it on a pedestal. And get a bit abstract about it, and people can get a little bit afraid of the word strategy. It's nothing more complicated than just the big plan. So our big aim, our overall plan and what we want to achieve is this, and therefore this is the strategy. And people can overcomplicate it and it becomes very abstract. And once you've made a concept abstract, it becomes very difficult to communicate it. And then you've fallen down before you even start if you can't effectively communicate to people what a strategy is, let alone what your strategy is.
Yeah, and I think, how many management development programs and leadership programs, I guess, contain the module on strategic thinking. And I think there's this bit of when people feel as though they need to progress in their career, they need to do this thing, which is strategic thinking. And in actual fact, quite often we start to talk about that is quite often just joining the dots, isn't it?
Yes,
it's having the oversight across the organisation, that instead of being the plan kind of down here within your team on the detail, as you said, it's the big plan. It's the umbrella plan that sits across the organisation.
I think strategic thinking is as much about tenacity as it is anything else. It's keeping firm to, the road will get windy and you'll go in different directions, but your destination is still going to be the same. And that's your strategy. And only at such time as that destination changes, then really does your strategy change to match that. I'm a great one for analogies. And I like the analogy of you building a house. Your strategy is you're building a house. Whether you decide you want one bathroom or two bathrooms, or you want to put the living room here or there, that's all about the nitty gritty of the plan of how you're doing it. But at the end of the day, you're building a house, and that's your goal that you stick to, and you keep your strategy moving in that direction. The means by which you get there will be variable, but you don't then end up with sub strategies around the bathroom or, the bedroom or whatever it might be. It's all focused in the same direction.
And I think what I've certainly observed in organisations is that when organisations struggle, you quite often see that being as a result of having a lack of consistency around kind of vision, direction, and leadership as well. Because I think when you see turnover in leadership, naturally people bringing their own ideas, direction kind of suffers, and it starts to go kind of one way or the other. But I think that kind of consistency is really important. But of course, there is a difference between vision, isn't there, and strategy.
Yeah, and again, I think that gets very confusing for people. You have concepts like purpose, vision, strategy, planning, and sometimes they're conflated. You get a strategic vision or you get a planning strategy, and it all becomes just these words just get in. I think actually it's very important to keep really clear on it. The vision of an organisation is it's above your strategy, and it's probably not going to change. So if you say, let's go back to the house building analogy, if you say the vision is to have somewhere warm and safe, that's the vision, and that's going to stay. Whether we do that by building a house or buying a caravan or whatever it might be, that then is your strategy that underpins it. But your vision, your overarching vision, which is what you can really get people inspired about, is about why you exist. It's not the how of anything, it is the why you exist as an organisation. And that is highly unlikely to change unless the purpose and goals of the organisation radically shift. And you can keep people anchored on that, and that's really important, to have something that people stay anchored to, and you can bring them back to whatever their individual motivations are. If you are aligned to this vision, then you are part of this organisation in a real sort of engagement sense. And then they will come with you on the strategy, because that's the means of delivering the vision. And if they buy into the vision, if you say strategically we've got to do some things that might be difficult, but it's all driving towards this vision, which we're all agreed is what we want to do, then you can keep people with you. But I think they get conflated, and I think people lose sight of how they connect with each other but are separate.
And following that through, I guess, Caroline, the implementation of strategy is just so crucial, isn't it? And so what quite often that you can find is that trap that organisations fall into, which is strategy is quite often discussed, decided around the board table, around, that kind of decision making table. And naturally, those people that are included in that group understand how they've got there. The consequences, the what's, why's, wherefores of all of that. The further away you are in your organisation from that decision-making table, of course, it is more difficult to understand what the strategy is, why, and kind of how for all of that. So I think the implementation, isn't it, of when you step out of that decision-making room, there then has to be a huge amount of effort on the explanation, the narrative, the understanding that you then translate and kind of cascade for your organisation, doesn't there?
Absolutely. And it's as much about empowerment as it is about anything, I think, because, I mean, how many times have, you and I have worked in lots of different organisations, and you've had a strategy presentation and someone has stood up and told you what it is. Yes. And then that's it. You go away, they go away again, and okay, we've got a new strategy. And that's the beginning and end of it. And you just go back to your desk and you crack on with what you were doing before, because what else are you going to do? And I think when it works well, it's when people understand that they need to listen to the strategy, understand what it is, but actually the next layer down, the next layer of leadership, the next layer of management, then needs to be supported to understand how that strategy relates to what they and their division or department does. So whether you're finance or HR or operations or sales or whatever it might be within the organisation, okay, if this is our strategy, what does that mean for what I do? What does that mean for what my people do? And what's our part to play in this? What do we need to do? Either keep doing, it's good old stop, start, continue, isn't it? What do we need to keep doing? What do we need to do more of? What do we need to do less of or do differently to deliver on that? And really carve out a sense of ownership for their piece of the jigsaw and what they do. And again, if they're building the west wall of the house, they're building a wall, but if they don't do it, the house will fall down. And that's the really important bit, is empowering that sense. And then that has to cascade down. So if you're if you lead a division and you get what your division is doing in part of that strategy, you have to communicate that, but it almost becomes an iteration of the same process, doesn't it? You've then got to empower each of your team leaders, each of your managers, whatever the next layer down is, to almost do the same exercise and engage their people. And it has to go absolutely right down to the bottom. And, we've all heard the slightly trite analogy about the guy pushing the broom at NASA, but, that's the one that springs to mind. But it absolutely is that. The guy who's unloading the bricks is still part of the overall strategy, and needs to understand his role in it. And everyone needs to understand that if they don't do what they do, then it won't work. Because if they weren't integral to the strategy of the business, they wouldn't be here.
Yeah, and there's a personal motivation of buy-in towards that overall vision, towards that top piece, and then actually buying into the strategy about what it is that we're going to do, isn't there? Because I think it's really important, particularly I think in the modern world. You've got more generations entering into the workplace, and in actual fact I think there are different expectations around a career and an employer and such, I think, now. So I think that alignment with kind of purpose and the what and the why, I think is really, really important for kind of the motivation and for retention engagement, performance levels, all of that type of thing, isn't there? But then I think there's a secondary piece there, which is how can you expect your people to make the right decisions in the right way, using the right behaviours when they interact with their customers, if they don't understand the context in which they are working? And that's where I think, being able to translate the strategy all the way through the organisation is really important, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think if I was to name kind of one of the really big challenges, I think, for organisations in terms of their managers' skills and capabilities, it would certainly be that strategic narrative of actually managers having the time to digest it, and then to think, how am I going to translate that in a way that inspires my team? But they get it. They understand what they need to be doing on a day-to-day basis to be able to contribute towards that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think leaders, as it sort of moves down the level, each layer has a responsibility to support their people to be able to do that. You can't just hand a strategy off and say, now make it yours. Maybe you've got a handful of people who can do that. Maybe you've got a handful of people who can take the strategic vision and can immediately go, I get how this relates to me and my bit of the business, and I get how to translate this for my people. Brilliant.
It's not common though, is it?
Keep hold of those people. Yeah, absolutely. But actually, people need support to do it. So, and I mean, actively facilitate sessions. Sit down with them and go through the strategy and say, let's talk about how this relates to your bit of the business and your thoughts on it, and really do that process with them.
And there's a diversity and inclusion piece, isn't there, that runs all the way through this, I think, from the challenge and the scrutiny of the strategy from the top all the way through to what you just touched on, is that in genuinely diverse teams, you're going to have doers, you're going to have thinkers, you're going to have all sorts of strengths, and we can't always expect people to do that bit which you just described, is it? Which is, I get the strategy, I can translate it, and now I've got a really good narrative for my team. Some people are naturally stronger in other areas, are going to just need some more of that support, aren't they? That's just diverse teams, isn't it?
And I think it's a really important point as well, that actually don't be too wedded to the hierarchical setup of things. If you've got a team which has got a great people manager in there who can really bring people along, but they're just never going to grasp that side of what you're asking them to do, but there's someone else in their team who can do it, then have a conversation with them and say, look, I think, Ria is really great at this level of strategic thinking. How would you feel about her being your strategy champion in the team? And mix things up a little bit. Don't assume that your hierarchy dictates that cascade of things. You need to get the information across. And the other thing I'd say in terms of that diversity of thinking is invite and accept challenge as well. You can't really say you're empowering people to be part of this if you just say to them, you have to tell me you agree 100% and then cascade it down. If they think that the direction is wrong, number one, listen to them, because they might be right. They might have some really good input to give you, and it might make you think as a leader, hey, hang on, we didn't have this voice in the room, and this is something we need to consider. Maybe to conclude, give me some of your top tips then around kind of strategy that you think leaders need to be thinking about. Oh, that's a good one. So I think be clear about what it is. And I mean that in an abstract sense. Be clear about what a strategy is, and start by helping people understand that. What's the difference between our purpose, vision, our strategy, and our operational plan and implementation, and help people to understand that before you even start. And then support people to understand what it means for them. And I think my last point would be, it's not a one-way process. Don't just tell, listen as well, all the way through, and make it an active process, active engagement rather than diktat of what's going to happen. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Carol. I know are fabulous tips, and it's been an absolute pleasure to talk through with you. Thank you so much. Thanks, Ria. Really enjoyed it. Bye. Cheers. Take care. Bye.